Good afternoon and welcome to the Congressional briefing on educating children and youth who are experiencing homelessness during COVID-19. My name is Barbara Duffield and I am the Executive Director of Schoolhouse Connection. Next slide, please. Oh, great, and we're already joined by Congressman Bacon. Nice to see you. We'll just do a little bit of logistics. We can't hear you, but we can see you, which is great. So a little bit about Schoolhouse Connection. We are a national nonprofit organization working to overcome homelessness through education. This next slide provides a little bit of information about our organization, as well as some of the resources that we offer. Next slide, please. So a little bit of logistics. If you have a question during the webinar today, during the briefing, there's a questions pane in your control panel. So just enter the questions there for any of the panelists. We'll be answering them at the very end. We also have an archive of the webinar and the materials. We record everything that we do and we make an archive available afterwards. And please also know that this PowerPoint will be available to you as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about our agenda today. Again, we're going to have remarks from our hosts, Congressman Panetta and Congressman Bacon. Then we'll have a panel discussion of homeless liaisons. We'll also have some Q&A and close up with some resources. Next slide, please. So just wanted to let everyone know that today's briefing is actually the fourth in a series of bipartisan briefings on the pandemic and family and youth homelessness. In July, we partnered with the Family Promise. We partnered with First Focus for Children and with the National Network for Youth to offer 3 briefings. We had one with youth who were experiencing homelessness, one with parents who were experiencing homelessness, and one with service providers who are working directly with families and youth experiencing homelessness. During the service provider briefing, we did have 2 amazing school district homeless liaisons from Kansas City, Missouri, and from Minneapolis, Minnesota, to talk about the pandemic from the school perspective as of July. But here we are today in October, and the nation continues to grapple with remote learning and an uncertain school year. So we want to focus even more specifically on the educational challenges facing children and youth who are homeless, how schools are attempting to address those challenges, what more needs to be done to ensure that our nation's most vulnerable children receive the support that they need, not just to survive, but also to thrive both today and in the future. So this slide has some of the links of our previous briefings that you can look at. But we are today thrilled to be joined by both U.S. Representative Jimmy Panetta as well as Congressman Don Bacon. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce U.S. Representative Jimmy Panetta. Congressman, we are so grateful for your leadership on child and youth homelessness and for taking the time to join us.
Great, thank you, Barbara. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, good. You made me download one of the many web applications we've been downloading throughout this pandemic. But thank you for allowing me to do that. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. And thank you, Barbara, so much and Schoolhouse Connection for organizing this briefing. But more importantly, what is obvious, your tireless advocacy on behalf of the homeless youth. So thank you very much. And obviously want to also take this time to thank our local liaisons who are on the ground, obviously working to ensure that no students are left behind as best as we can, and really helping students receive the resources they need to have a quality education. And also want to give a shout out to Dr. Donna Smith, who leads the homeless youth and services efforts here in Monterey County Office of Education. And then of course to my good friend and colleague, and I mean that, Don Bacon, obviously for his leadership on this important issue and ensuring that this is an issue that's not just a congressional issue, not just a federal issue, but a bipartisan issue as well. So thanks, Don, of course, always good to see you. And then, you know, what I've come to realize, and especially being here on the Central Coast of California, is I think we all kind of know that homelessness at all ages, you know, traditionally, it was sort of a local issue. Then it became a state issue. And now, as I see it, it is truly an all hands on deck issue. And that's part of the reason is because it's a multifaceted issue, be it with addiction, mental health issues, affordable housing issues. It makes it understandable that it basically requires a multi-layered response going forward. And that's why I'm glad that we're having this discussion about what federal government is doing to help out, especially when it comes to homelessness and our homeless youth. Now, it affects students, as you know, homeless students, all across the nation, but really here on the Central Coast. In my district, in Monterey County alone, youth homelessness has risen dramatically, with nearly 10,000 students out of 78,000 meeting the McKinney-Vento Act's of definition of homelessness. In Salinas Elementary School District, going down into Monterey County, over 3,500 students are homeless. That means that's 40% of the school district. Now, these children, as we know, face unique and large obstacles, and often, as we've seen, don't get the support they need. Now, the pandemic, unfortunately, has exacerbated these issues. I think prior to COVID-19, we were already seeing record numbers of family and youth homelessness, but our public health crisis has made it even more challenging for our liaisons to reach students in need, and more difficult for our children and families to access the critical services that they need. Now, distance learning, we've all been dealing with that, especially if you have children like I do in high school, but it can be nearly impossible, though, for those students without a place to connect safely, and a lack that daily interaction that they normally received by going into the school buildings, and the lack of that makes it even harder for our liaisons to monitor at-risk students. Now, imagine being in an area that has rural broadband issues already in place, and then not being able to access school or home on top of those issues. So, you know, it's something that needs to be addressed. I'm glad that we started to address it, at least with our economic relief in the packages that we put forward. Unfortunately, the current economic relief has run out, including enhanced unemployment insurance and direct payments to families, with mounting and permanent job losses that we're seeing. Even more families and more children are at risk of becoming homeless. Now, the continuing pandemic and underlying economic conditions really underscore the need to pass another relief package and provide continued unemployment benefits, rental assistance, and even another round of economic impact payments. We can't just continue to ignore the pressing needs of families across this country. Now, obviously, that another issue that we're focused on, another layer, is long-term housing supply to meet the needs of our families and, yes, of our students, and encourage the building of affordable housing through programs like the low-income housing tax credit. I'm a strong believer that expanding the LIHTC, as HR2, the Moving Forward Act, would do, would definitely increase the housing supply, and it would bring down the cost of housing, especially here on the Central Coast. But more needs to be done. And as this much needed relief will not just solve our problems overnight. And the housing supply, it's not a short-term issue, that's a long-term issue, as we know well. And so we need more direct funding for homelessness services and for outreach efforts to children and families in need. And we can start by better supporting our local homeless liaisons, who I know you'll hear from today. These liaisons, who are part of our local school districts, are really working hard to identify homeless and children and youth, to ensure school access and stability, and provide support services and coordinate with community to meet basic needs. That's why I'm proud to co-sponsor HR 7950, the Emergency Family Stabilization Act, introduced by my good friend Don Bacon, along with Representatives John Yarmouth and Danny Davis, who I serve with on the Ways and Means Committee. It's important legislation. We create new emergency funding stream to help children, youth, and families who are experiencing that homelessness. I'm also proud to continue pushing leadership on this for that bill to be included in the next round of a relief package. Now, we got to support greater investments as well, and programs specifically targeted towards children and youth experiencing homelessness. That means support for the McKinney-Vento Act's Education and Homeless Children and Youth Program, and the Runaway for Homeless Youth Act programs as well. I think we all understand how beneficial both of those programs are. In fact, I was proud to offer an amendment to this year's appropriations bill that highlighted the importance of the EHCY. And obviously, we know the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program also serves to help homeless youth, but in a more direct manner, as we've seen, to seek immediate, to get after the immediate needs of homeless youth and students. And it can also be used to provide housing and residential services such as crisis intervention and support outreach efforts to prevent and address homelessness. Now, both of these programs are critical to the health and safety of future of students and the housing insecure students. And I'm hopeful that today we all have the opportunity to learn more about the work of that our liaisons do right here on the ground, and how important, though, it is for us to fund them, not just today, but in tomorrow. And like I said, it really is past time that we take this issue seriously, and I think that's why we're all on this webinar today. But we also need to take it seriously at all levels of government, especially the federal government. So thank you, Barbara. I appreciate this opportunity, and thanks for allowing me to be here and be a part of such a great effort that you guys are putting forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Panetta. We are very, very grateful for your leadership. And I'm also very happy to introduce Congressman Don Bacon, who joins us for the second time, who has joined us for the youth briefing and joining us again now. Congressman Bacon, thank you for your leadership, and we'd love to hear your remarks.
Thank you, Barbara. We appreciate you organizing this webinar, and good to see Jimmy. Our mutual friend, Salud Carbajal, unfortunately has COVID right now. I hope he's recovering. I haven't really heard, but probably the two guys I hang around with most on the other side of the aisle is Jimmy and Salud Carbajal, both from California. I'm hoping they bring me out more just so I can see the good weather out in California. And yeah, I really appreciate you, Barbara, the whole team that's here today. I think Jimmy covered a lot of ground that I won't recover because there's a lot of duplication there, so I won't do that. But you know, I'm the co-chair of the Foster Care Caucus. That's what's got me involved with you quite a bit, because the #1 homeless population for folks in their teens or 20s and 30s were those that were in foster care or coming out of foster care, but foster care being a common denominator. And I got a heavy heart for that. I'm a two-time foster parent myself. My father was involved with it. And, you know, our children are sometimes in homes, no fault of their own, where there's dysfunction. We try to heal those homes with the Family First program, but some families just can't take care of a child. And so foster care is very important. And then you see that the #1 cause of homelessness is a common denominator of being foster care. It's heartbreaking because it was never the kid's fault to begin with, right? And this whole thing about transitioning out for our foster youth, to me, it's a heartbreaking thing. I can't speak for Jimmy. He was probably totally independent by the time he was 16. I don't know. But I needed help until I was 20. And all 4 of my kids needed help beyond 20. And yet our foster youth at the age of 19 in many states, some states are different, are sort of on their own. And that's what sort of motivated me to get involved in this, which leads to a lot of the homeless issue for the younger adults. And so, you know, I got good news and bad news, and I got reality on this. The good news to me was prior to March, we had really had some of the strongest economy this country's ever had. You know, our poverty rate was the lowest in our history at 10.5%. That's good, but it's also bad because 10.5% is still a huge part of our population, over 30 million, 33 million to be precise. But still, it's good to see those numbers going down. That was the lowest poverty ever. And then when you look at like the median income in 2019 saw a 6.8% increase. That's the highest increase in the history of our country. So there were some good things going on, so that was the good news. The bad news, COVID obviously put us backwards. But even when you have the strongest economy, you have 10% of the population in poverty. And so you got to have a good safety net program out here. So you got to have a strong safety net program, but you want to elevate as many people out of poverty as you can through a growing economy. But we're always going to need a strong safety net program because we're going to have issues like homelessness and children that, for no fault of their own, get put in these terrible predicaments. And Jimmy talked a little bit about the supplemental. I got to commend him. Him and I have both worked together on trying to find a middle ground to get a supplemental pass, because we need some of these bills passed. And too much in Congress is they demand 95% before they take it. Sometimes you got to take 50% and pass a bill. And if you need more, come back 2 months later and do some more. But Jimmy and I came together on a bill of $1.5 trillion that would have had a lot of these programs in it. And it was something that we could have all agreed on, I think. But our Congress is so dysfunctional right now. We can't get enough people to meet in the middle to do something like that. And it's a real shame. When you look at what happened at COVID, we had our unemployment tripled within a month. And it's just incredible, right? And that put a lot of strain on families immediately. And then these schools shut down. And for many of our kids, that was their best access to fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. And so we've passed, legislation to get these summer food programs strengthened. I know I was out at the food banks where the schools were giving out food to their students in the summer. And now we made it so it could be like that all year long. Because like in New York, they just had to go back to closing some schools down, right? And so that's some areas of things that we've worked on. Jimmy already mentioned HR 7950. That's a bill that I hope to work with Yarmouth and Dan, or I guess it was Danny Davis, but it's the Emergency Family Stabilization Act. And it really, if I could put that down just to brass tacks, it's getting federal money to the local organizations. They know how to spend it the best. They know what they need for, whether it's Omaha or Toledo, wherever it may be. And our goal is to get money to these organizations that can directly deal with the homeless issue in their local areas. I'm also one of the leads for HR 7947. It's supporting foster youth and families through the Pandemic Act, which I know, Barbara, you're familiar with. But what we're trying to do here is, during the pandemic, we don't want kids to age out. They need the Chaffee grants. They need to be able to have the housing assistance they need, because during the pandemic, it's not a good time to say, okay, now you're on your own. So we're not allowing, I should say, we're preventing the foster youth from transitioning out. We're extending that transition period so they got that safety umbrella or the safety net to hold them through so we can get through this pandemic. I share Jimmy's concerns on affordable housing. Today, builders in our area, an expensive home in our area is $300,000. That's probably not the same for Jimmy, right? It's all relative. But the builders today want to build expensive homes. It's hard they don't make much money on the lower income homes or the starter homes. We got to find ways to get that people need to start a home to start in. And there's a lot of these higher end homes. There's a shortage of low end housing, and we got to find ways to incentivize that. In our city, you get a home listed at $150,000, 20 people will bid on it in one day, and it will be bid up to 200, which means there's a demand for homes of affordable priced homes. So we do got to work on that. And I'll just close with this, because I think Jimmy covered most of my areas as well. This low income tax credit thing that Jimmy talked about is critical. When you put that together with 2 or 3 other programs, you can actually get homeless people off the street. So we have 2 homeless veterans facilities that are paid for by this, and some other programs that you cobble together, and you can pay for dormitories or apartments for homeless vets. We just opened up a new one in Omaha. I'm working with NIFA and some other organizations in Omaha to now do the same for foster youth. Let's build an apartment building just for transitioning foster youth, so they get an affordable home and it's paid for by the tax credits and some other combination of things. And that will help alleviate a lot of the homeless for the people in their young 20s and 30s, I believe. So with that, I really appreciate the great work of this team, and I look forward to learning from you all. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Congressman Panetta, Congressman Bacon, for joining us today, for supporting the critical legislation that you do for our children, our youth, and our families who are experiencing homelessness. This is a very invisible population, and this population that needs your voices, all of our voices. So again, thank you so much for your time. I now want to switch to our esteemed panel from across the country of McKinney-Vento Liaisons. As was mentioned earlier, prior to the pandemic, we had 1.5 million children and youth experiencing homelessness in our public schools. That was an all-time record. The U.S. Department of Education estimates that another 1.4 million children who are under the age of 6 experience homelessness. And we know that school offers safety, stability, normalcy, food, caring adults, and of course the education that's ultimately the way out of homelessness. So under the McKinney-Vento Act, for those listeners who are new to the issue of education for homeless children and youth, under federal law, the McKinney-Vento Act, which is still in place, local education agencies are required to identify and remove barriers to identifying children who are homeless, enrolling them, and removing barriers to their retention in school. And with that comes a requirement that every local education agency designate a liaison for students experiencing homelessness who have very specific responsibilities, both internal to the school system, but also external to the community. So today we get to learn from 3 homeless liaisons. We're going to share their insights and experiences. So what I would like to do now is start with introductions. If our panelists could tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your school district or districts, and also a bit about the children, youth, and families that you serve. I want to start with Antonio, who is in his school office right now on the school phone. Because that was the way we could get the best audio. So Antonio, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Barbara, for having me on. My name is Antonio Lewis, and I'm the McKinney-Vento and Foster Care Liaison for Highline Public Schools, which is located in Burien, Washington, just a little south of Seattle. This is my 11th school year working in the district and working with students and families who qualify for the McKinney-Vento program. Highline is a district of roughly 20,000 students. We have 33 schools, 95 different languages spoken by our students. In terms of our McKinney-Vento students that we serve, with last year's numbers, I would say 44% of the 1,215 qualified would identify as Latino Hispanic. 19 would be Black or African American, 14% white, 9% 2 or more races, 7% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, 5% Asian, and then finally 2% American Indian and Alaskan Native. Over the last 4 school years, on average, we have qualified 1,250 students for the McKinney-Vento program. And what I've noticed, and both congressmen have kind of mentioned it as well during their talks, is that the trend has been the cost of housing has continued to increase. And here in Washington State, and particularly the district that I serve, when I started back in 2010, we had a lot of families who were unable to afford buying a home in Seattle, and so they were settling in our district. Well, within the last 5 years, they've continued to move further and further south in hopes of finding affordable housing. But what I always tell folks is affordability is relative. So what's affordable for one family or one person may not be for another. And unfortunately, with a lot of our families being larger, so we're talking 3 or 4 students, making the minimum wage simply is just not going to be enough for them to get out of their situation and into permanent housing. So that's kind of a little bit in terms of kind of the students that I serve. We're a very high needs district, a very diverse district, which I'm proud of. But obviously the call is for more affordable housing so that the numbers can go down and we don't have situations where kids are moving 4 or 5 times within a school year and falling further and further behind their house peers.
Thank you very much. Aisha, if you could introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself, your history, your district, and the students that you serve and their families.
Okay, hi. My name is Aisha Butler, and I'm the Homeless Liaison, Foster Care POC, and Parental Involvement Specialist for Nola Public Schools. I have been the Homeless Liaison for the past 15 years, but I have worked with the homeless program for a total of 25 years. Nola Public Schools is the inner city district of approximately 4,700 students with a makeup of 80% African American, 9% Hispanic, 7% Caucasian, 2% with an 84% rate of economically disadvantaged children. The populations I service are mainly African American and Hispanic, and they are mainly doubled up due to the lack of affordable housing, adequate housing in the city pre-COVID. So COVID just made things worse for our family.
Thank you very much. Donna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Dr. Donna Smith, and I'm the program coordinator for homeless services for children and youth at the Monterey County Office of Education. Monterey County currently has 24 school districts and 8 charter schools. Our district we have a lot of variety in our district. We go all the way to North Monterey County, all the way to some of our schoolhouses in South County, Carmel, Pacific Grove on one side, and then Salinas, the city of Salinas. So we have a lot of variety in our school district. So last school year, at the end of the year, when we did our final counts for our homeless population of children and youth, we had 9,986 students in Monterey County alone in California identified as homeless youth. And that's significant for a county of our size. The year prior to that, we had 9,905. So we do have quite a need here in Monterey County on the Central Coast in California. I've been working in education for 34 years in many different capacities throughout Salinas and also the Bay Area. And I've been a liaison here at the County Office of Education going on 2 years now, but was a liaison prior to that in one of our school districts here in Monterey County. Of our population of students who are qualified as McKinney-Vento students, about 8,900 are doubled up. So that's a significant group in our homeless population of children and youth. Also, about half of our children qualified are limited English proficient. And I would like to say about 1,000, a little bit over 1,000 are in our special education programs here in Monterey County. Okay, that's it for me right now.
Thank you very much. So I'm hearing from all of you some trends and numbers, and also a good deal of experience that you have, and also hearing that among the students that you're identifying as McKinney-Vento, students of color are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. So just to point out that just as we can address homelessness without addressing systemic racism, we also can't ensure equitable education for students of color if we're not addressing homelessness and really paying attention to McKinney-Vento and the services for our homeless students. So for the next question, nationally, we're seeing a trend of increased need for families because of job loss and family stress and natural disasters, which I know at least 2 of you have experienced recently. But also we're seeing a pattern of decreased identification, challenges identifying our students who are McKinney-Vento because of remote learning. So I'd like to ask, comparing this time of the school year to last year, are your numbers of students who are identified lower or higher? Why do you think that is? And why does it matter? Why does identifying and being able to identify these students matter? I want to start with you, Aisha, if you could tell us a little bit about kind of the numbers at the beginning, kind of the challenges of identification and why all of it matters. Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I don't have an accurate count right now because the collection time frame for the state hasn't closed yet because of hurricanes Laura and Delta. We're still counting, those who've been displaced by the hurricanes. But from what I've seen, our numbers are lower. We've had some that haven't even reported any homeless numbers yet. So it is lower, but our children have to be identified. If they aren't identified, we don't know who they are, who needs services, and what services they need. So identification is key for us. And with homeless children, they're normally a year behind academically. So they need to be identified. And they face more than just, homelessness is more than just an impact on poverty. It affects a child in school dramatically with absenteeism, food insecurities, behavior, academic problems, self-esteem, and even graduation rates. So, we have to make sure they're identified to get services. And sometimes school is the only stable place that some of our children have. So in essence, school is essential. It's an essential support in the journey out of poverty for most of our children, most of our families.
Thank you very much. Donna, what about, I know you don't have your numbers either, but what are you hearing from your liaisons in the county in terms of their numbers and challenges with identifying?
Well, one thing I did find is we identify all year long, right? Because people go in and out of homelessness throughout the year. So you might start with one number and then eventually end up with another. So at the end of last year, we did see an increase from the prior year because we had March, April, May, and part of June, depending on the schools, you know, that fell under the COVID period. So with that said, some of our districts, actually 12 of our districts did see an increase, especially toward the end of last year. And mainly on the peninsula, but in other areas too, but mainly on the peninsula, our families really depend on the hospitality industry, you know, hotels, restaurants, entertainment. And with COVID, so many of those shut down or had to lay people off. So we saw a significant increase, especially in the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, in families losing homes. Another thing that we did see is because of COVID, since almost, well, 8,000 of our families, according to our records, lived doubled or tripled up. Because of COVID, some of those families had to leave where they were living because families were trying to protect themselves. And so we saw a rapid increase of those families all of a sudden without a secure place to live. So we did see that. One thing we are experiencing though this year because of COVID, once again, we did go to online registration. And when you do that, people do fall through the cracks. We all use a home residency questionnaire that's sent out. But when you're registering for a school in person, that secretary or registrar or clerk helps you through the process and explains it to you. With online learning, you really don't get that personal touch, or online registration, you don't get that personal touch. And so I think we are going to be struggling with identifying who our kids are this year.
Thanks, Donna. And Antonio, you had mentioned just prior to the call that you had some numbers and your numbers were down. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing, the challenges with identifying students at this time? And, you know, again, like why does this matter?
Sure. So for us, at this time last year, I want to say we had about 700 students qualified, and as of today, we have about 560. So that's a decrease of 140 students, and I think that's in large part, obviously, because of the pandemic, and with us being in complete remote learning, a lot of the families and unaccompanied youth were unable to reach them. So we're calling all of the members that we may have as an emergency contact. They're either no longer in service or they can't accept incoming calls, or the voicemail box is full. We've also done some home visits on a few occasions, and many of the families who they were doubled or tripled up with reported that they were no longer there and they didn't have any contact information for them. So it's really hard to know kind of what the current situation is if you can't find where the students are. And as kind of Aisha mentioned, it's not just education. There's so many other things that homelessness impacts as it relates to students. And so identification is important because you don't know what a family or an unaccompanied youth needs if you don't enroll them and if you don't have them qualify for the program. And so we're also doing online enrollment. We do have a section on our online enrollment. Basically, was transferred from paper form to electronic. So there is a question that asks families, do you rent or own your own home? And if they answer no, that elicits an alert that I get to follow up with the family to find out what's their housing situation, since they indicated they don't rent or own. There also allows families or unaccompanied youth to self-identify as McKinney-Vento. So if they are in a shelter or if they are in a motel, they can click that when they're filling out the online enrollment, and I'll get that alert, I'll confirm it, I'll qualify them, and then I send the paperwork to the building designee so that they're aware they have a new student or a returning student that's been qualified for the program.
Great, thanks. So we're talking about the challenges with identification and school and during remote learning, and of course, beyond identification, we know that whether it's remote or whether it's hybrid or even for in-person learning, during the pandemic, there are additional educational challenges. So the next question is really to talk about, beyond identification, what are some of the challenges that are presented by hybrid or remote models, or even in person during the pandemic, specifically for children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. And Antonio, I know you're holding the phone. You're going to be holding the phone for a whole hour. Thank you for doing that. But
That's okay.
We'll just start with you.
Sure. So, sorry, can you repeat that real quick?
The question is just sort of, we know that identification is challenges, but when we're looking at the additional educational challenges that are created by either remote or hybrid models during the pandemic.
Okay. So one of the bigger issues, and we've discussed this before, is childcare. So a lot of our families work multiple jobs, and so we have situations where the high school sibling is unable to take part in their remote learning because they're watching the younger siblings. And then we also have cases where families might reside in an area where there's not a strong signal for Wi-Fi. So that's an issue. Even if we get them the device in the hotspot, if they're in a location where the signal is weak, then how are they going to log on for remote learning? How will they have a consistent signal to do what they need to do? Another instance too is that a shortage at times of hotspots, particularly if you have larger families with 4 and 5 children. Well, the more children connected to that hotspot, the quicker the data is used. And so that's been a challenge in terms of getting enough hotspots to our families. It's not enough. So we know that, and that's something that we're addressing as a district. Another issue that also cropped up as well is food insecurity or food deserts. So for a lot of families that may reside outside of the district, they may lack transportation to get to that food bank or to get to that local school to get meals for their children. So looking at ways in which, you can use your transportation department and other district staff, to make sure those needs are met for the students, because it goes beyond the academic piece. You have the social and emotional needs as well. And a lot of our students and families are dealing with that, and counseling. And, for our families that are in shelters, we had a couple of cases where the families tested positive for COVID. So they had to leave the shelter, go to one of the quarantine sites further up north for the 2-week period. And then once they tested negative, they could return to shelter. So just the constant, in and out, day-to-day, struggles that our families are having just has a huge impact on the whole child. And so that's kind of what we're seeing. The pandemic just really, as one of the congressmen put earlier, exacerbated an issue that was there pre-COVID. It just made it worse. So,
thank you. Aisha, any additional barriers in addition to what Antonio mentioned that you're seeing based the kind of challenges for homeless children of remote hybrid models?
Yes, I know they're having difficulty finding a secure place to log on, where there's a lot of they're distracted, easily distracted. The parents have more information on how to do digital technology themselves. And it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for all of them, for the students, for the parents, for the teachers. And, the biggest thing I've heard is that it's very distracting for the child to be trying to do virtual learning. And there's so much going on behind him or around him. So it's very distracting. And especially for our students that are below level, it's really hard for them to get with the virtual learning. To catch it. They're still trying to catch up. So they're playing catch up the whole while they're doing virtual learning. And I think they're just pushing them further back.
Thank you. Donna, additional barriers, dynamics that you're seeing locally?
One thing that we've talked a lot within our county office of ed and reaching out to our districts and charter schools is the lack of devices. Trying to be able to, they're back ordered. We're trying to get enough devices for all of our families, our students, even today. And then of course, hotspots. We do struggle with internet connectivity, reliable, plus also affordable internet services in our county. One thing, we have so many doubled up students, And if you think about it, if you're got two families and each family has 2 or 3 children, you could potentially have 5 children in an apartment trying to log on at the same time. And then all of that interference. So you're right, distractibility. Also, what's important, I think, for some of our students is having that connectivity with a teacher. That relationship building is so important, or with an administrator or somebody on the site. And I think that that is a huge loss to our children who are experiencing homelessness, because that might be a very secure place for that child. And I know we're all doing the best we can, but I think that relationship is so important, and we're really seeing a loss of that right now.
Thank you. So, these are incredible challenges, and, this is a congressional briefing, so we're talking about federal responses as well as state and local, and knowing that liaisons all across the country are dealing with some of these same challenges and doing their very best. We do know that under the CARES Act that was passed, and also by the HEROES Act that the House passed, there were education funds that were provided that could be used under the activities of the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. It was an allowable use of funds to support homeless students, but unlike previous disaster bills, it wasn't a requirement that funds be spent on students who are experiencing homelessness. So this question is really sort of about, with respect to the CARES Act education funds and the needs that you're seeing, if those funds are being used in your districts to meet the specific needs of homeless students, or if you're using other funds, McKinney-Vento, Title I general funds. So just really sort of try to get at that specific issue. And Donna, we left off with you, so I'll start with you this time.
Well, I know a lot of the CARES Act money went for PPE, and also buying equipment for schools to get ready for reopening, and also technology, hotspots, Chromebooks, iPads, whatever districts use, because they all use different types of devices. So I know that most of our schools in Monterey County get Title I funds, and so that money is always set aside to pay for any expenses other than housing for our children experiencing homelessness. So we also, at a county level, have worked through our United Way to make sure we have backpacks for all of our students in Monterey County who need it. And also we have hygiene kit materials here. If there's food issues, we try to bridge the gap. So with multiple funding, we're trying to meet the needs of our students, either through CARES Act money for devices, or through McKinney-Vento funds, or Title I funds, or LCFF funds at the district levels as well.
But it sounds like the CARES Act dollars are not specifically, you're using kind of a patchwork, and McKinney-Vento obviously is pretty targeted. So, and I guess I meant to add this for the beginning and for Antonio and Aisha too. So, if there were in the next package very specific dollars, education for homeless children and youth, how would that be helpful to meeting some of these specific needs? CARES Act is very broad, McKinney-Vento is pretty specific. So if you could speak a little bit to how that would be helpful if there were specific education for homeless children and youth dollars.
Well, one thing that is lacking is the ability to use funds for a school district. Like I said, I have 24 liaisons who are terrific for public schools, and then 8 charter school liaisons. And one thing that we find is that we can use our current funding to buy materials and supplies, like I said, hygiene materials, things like that, but we have no ability at all as a liaison to help families with emergency housing. So let's say there's a family that they lose their housing on a Friday night. We all talked about that earlier, and they have to, wait to get into a shelter, or wait to get into transitional housing. It would be so beneficial for our school liaisons to be able to help out those families financially for a few days until we can find another solution. And I think we all agreed that we don't have that kind of flexibility with our dollars to offer immediate assistance to families like that. So
great. Yeah, and we're definitely going to talk more about that specifically, some of those housing barriers next. So thanks very much for teeing that up.
Sorry.
Aisha, that's okay. Aisha, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of CARES Act and McKinney-Vento and how, McKinney-Vento specifically can be particularly helpful towards like finding and assisting this specific population at this time?
With the CARES Act funding, I know our district, we use the funding to provide technology for all students. That included tablets, iPads, hotspot, earbuds, PPE, and also for staff to deal with the new normal. COVID brought on things we never anticipated. So you need a staff to kind of direct and guide those issues. Additional funding would be wonderful. It's always a wonderful thing, And once I think our students come back to in-school learning, the numbers are going to really increase. So the additional funding would really help us to assist our families. And like Donna said, if we could get some flexible funding, because with McKinney-Vento and Title I Part A, is limited in what you allowable cost. But if we could get some flexible funding to assist with the housing needs, that would also be wonderful.
Great, thank you. Antonio.
Just pretty much echo what they've said. I can't really speak to the CARES Act specifically, but what I can say is with the MV funds and Title I funds, we've been able to, target hotspot needs and other materials for our students. We've also received gift cards through our Highline Schools Foundation. So they've done a lot of advocacy work with folks in the community. So food gift cards went a long way to provide to students and families. They've also provided Old Navy gift cards to us over the years for students and families that are in need of clothing, because as of right now, we're a grantee district, and so when we purchase any type of clothing for McKinney-Vento students, it's for students who attend schools that require uniform, because that's a barrier. So for those kids who are not at uniform schools, our Highline Schools Foundation has been huge, in being able to assist our program, get the cards out to the students and families. But I think the main thing really is that flexible funding, because we get those calls and family has nowhere to go, so then you're scrambling trying to find a solution on a late Friday, and sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. And so having the ability to get a family into a motel, even if it's for the weekend or for a week, that buys you a little bit more time than trying to call everyone in your Rolodex to see, okay, can you take this family in at the shelter? Because another thing that COVID has impacted is families are staying longer in shelter, and many shelters are at capacity. So if you're at capacity, you can't bring in more families. That in turn results in many families being literally homeless and in their vans or RVs or, and trying to figure out where they're going to sleep, tonight. So flexible funding, I think, is critical for our liaisons who are on the ground and doing the work and trying to get our students and families housed in emergency situations.
Yes.
Great, you all are again just totally teeing up the next and I think actually the last question before we open it up, but it's an important one because we all know that obviously schools are education institutions, but they see things that nobody else sees. They see family that no other system is really going to see. There's a level of trust. Even now with school closures, liaisons are lifelines and doing work that isn't necessarily very visible, but also our children and our youth aren't very visible. And part of the reason they're not visible is unlike this sort of stereotype of single adult homelessness, most children and youth that schools identify are, as you've talked about, doubled up. So we know, for example, the last Department of Education report, only 12% of students identified by public schools as homeless were in shelter. That was pre-COVID. 7% in motels, 7% unsheltered, and 74% staying with other people temporarily. So the vast majority not visible. And of course, we know there's mobility between all those situations. And yet, to access housing assistance, to access HUD homeless assistance, you pretty much have to be in a shelter, on the street, or in a motel that charity or government is paying for. So that leaves out a big bunch, a large group, the majority actually of students identified as experiencing homelessness under education law. So if you could talk a little bit about some of the specific struggles or challenges, a lot of people may think, oh, they have a roof over their head, they're doing all right, they're not on the streets yet. So just some of the specific challenges for our children, youth, and families who don't meet HUD's definition, but do meet the education definition whether it's safety, health, learning, just some of the challenges that they face. And Antonio, I left off with you, so I'll start with you this time.
Sure. So for a lot of our families, the numbers as far as doubled up mirrors what it is nationally. So I think for many people, they don't understand, even though they may have a roof over their head and they're doubled up. In a lot of situations, they're doubled or tripled up with family or friends who are not supposed to have them there. So they might have Section 8 housing, or even if they don't have Section 8 housing, they're in violation of their lease. So they're jeopardizing their housing to take in that friend, to take in, that sister, that uncle, that brother. And so when you have, cases of 8 to 10 plus people, in a 2-bedroom, there's pretty much no privacy. It's very difficult for kids to be able to learn. You have food issues as well. And there's always kind of that threat as if, you're the family, you're a burden, even if they're family or friends, on the family you're staying with. So in a lot of cases, kids will get involved in activities and kind of be away from the home as much as possible, and then come, to shower and sleep. So doubled up doesn't mean security. It just means that they're not literally, homeless, which obviously we don't want. But there's just so many different things that come with that. And in many cases, they can be kicked out at any time. And I've seen it to where they're doubled up on Monday. By Friday, there was an argument between the father and the other person, and now all of the kids in the family are out and they're scrambling and trying to get into shelter. All the shelters are full, so where do they go? So doubled up, I think, is not this, panacea where it's like, oh, they're doubled up, they're good to go, we can get the services to them. It's like, no, there's still services that they need. It just means they're not on the street. So I think a broadening of the definition to include doubled up, when we know the national numbers are what they are, will really go a long way in improving the outcomes and lives of our unaccompanied students and families if they're included in that definition, as they should be.
Thank you. And we know certainly for Washington State that there's research from Building Changes that shows that the academic outcomes for students who are experiencing homelessness and doubled up situations are pretty much on par with students in shelters and unsheltered. So the academic impact is definitely there. So thank you. Aisha, you want to add a little bit about what you see the challenges are?
I think that is the greatest barrier for our families, not meeting the HUD definition, because I know in New Orleans, pre-COVID, affordable housing and adequate housing was an issue. And then here comes COVID. So if I'm doubled up, tripled up, stress is really is the real thing now with COVID. So I may have been fine to stay there, but with COVID, the host families got scared, so they started putting them out. And where do they go? At that point, they were housed with someone, so they didn't meet HUD's definition. And like I said, in New Orleans, housing is horrible anyway, and the shelter spaces are very limited. But I found a way to kind of work through some issues. Become active in your COC. Mm-hmm. Become a member of your COC. Attend the meetings. Do planning. Be very visible, because when they see you, they're going to think about McKinney-Vento families. And if you're always at the meetings, always kind of jigging and jabbing at them like I like to do, they always remember the homeless, the families, the families, the families, the families. And because of COVID, I know our COC, they created a referral form, so we can refer through with the referral form. And it's been working, knock on wood, until there aren't any more spaces. But, I did take that as they are listening to me. And eventually I do believe that HUD they're going to need our meetings. They're going to have to realize that we go together. So I would say, get active in your COC, attend meetings, and, be that presence for our family. Because I know with our COC in New Orleans, we're all charter schools. It's all charter. And I'm the only one that's present at the COC meetings. So become the face for your families. Become that thorn in people's side, and just advocate for your families.
Thank you. And Donna, this is something we talked about a lot too. So, what's the process? So, we've talked about the challenges of doubled up, but the reality is in many communities, You know, there isn't necessarily a referral form, and you're not eligible, so you don't get help. So what does it look like Friday, 4 o'clock? We talked about this scenario, all of us, family comes to you. What's the process for the family that doesn't meet HUD's definition? What do you have to do? You know, if they identify themselves to a school and they need a motel room, you know, what are some of the actual barriers to housing and emergency services that you see for the families who are doubled up or motels where they're paying for it themselves?
Well, the one like we talked about before, so when you're getting McKinney-Vento dollars, like I am here at the county office, or Title I dollars, or you know, at the district levels, you can't use that money to help pay for housing. You know, I can't get a voucher or to give to a family for housing. That comes from other agencies throughout Monterey County. So first of all, what I have to do is refer them out to other agencies. I check and see if any of our shelters have room. And we have some shelters, family shelters here. I check with them. I have them go and do what we call a CARS assessment with our Coalition of Homeless Service Providers or Housing Resource Center. There's many different agencies that do that, but that takes time because then you get put on a waiting list and then you have to be interviewed. So immediate help, if there's no opening in our shelters, we don't have anything for them as liaisons, which is heartbreaking. And we have a very long and large county. Monterey County is a long county. And so most of our shelters are in the peninsula or in Salinas, like Monterey, Marina, the peninsula. So we have schools and districts that are over an hour away from here. So if you have a family in South County and they need immediately shelter, how do they get here? You know, and are they going to get here in time? So there's so many issues. So once again, that's a big barrier for us, a big problem for us, is not being able to meet their needs immediately. And so
yeah, so yeah, and this, you know, both Congressman Panetta and Congressman Bacon, you know, they are both co-sponsors and champions of the Emergency Family Stabilization Act, which is the legislation that would provide direct, flexible funding to community agencies, including schools. And here's the key thing is it's specifically for children and youth and families who are homeless under the education definition. So, you know, so what difference would that make? And we sort of talked about it, but let's say it's the same scenario, Donna, you know, Emergency Family Stabilization Act, what difference does that make? And then we'll go around and have each of you kind of respond to that question.
Well, right now, a lot of the federal dollars and state dollars that have to do with housing go to our local organizations, which are wonderful. I mean, they're all doing different things to help the community. It would be nice to have that money go as well to the districts, because we're on the front lines for our families. You know, we're the ones that notice it first. And so for us to be able to give that emergency aid right when it's needed, I think would make a huge impact on how we can support our families. Because that must be very scary for the adults as well as the children to know that they don't have any place to stay that night. And we might have to sleep in our car tonight, tomorrow night, where are we going to get food? It'd be nice for us, a really benefit to our programs that we're already offering, to be able to be that safety net for our families as well.
Great, thank you. Aisha.
Flexible funding would really secure housing for our families. It would, you know, we could do rental assistance, utility assistance, job training, motel stays. We could hire personnel to empower our parents so that they can remain housed and have a positive future for their children. And my definition with HUD, you know, this is my analogy for HUD, my personal analogy. I'm not trying to bash HUD, but the definition. HUD wants our families on the streets. Mckinney-Vento, we're trying to keep them off the streets. We're trying to keep them from hitting the streets. You know, so the flexible funding would really allow us to do that until we could get assistance maybe through HUD. So I know years ago we had money through the HUD Act, and I did motel vouchers, and it was wonderful. You know, I could house in a motel for a week, and then we move over to the COC. But, you know, that would allow us the flexibility and allow us to help our parents without draining or tapping the COC.
Great. Thank you. And Antonio, what difference would it make in Highline?
I would say it's the same, so that we're, not constantly operating in crisis mode when you get those, 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock calls on a Friday. And again, the flexibility for also homeless prevention, because I know we talked a lot today about families and students who are qualified. Well, if you had flexible dollars, you could prevent some of those families from getting into that position to where they would need the services, because obviously with the McKinney-Vento funds and Title I funds, it's very clear what you can use those funds for, and housing is not one of those things. So as flexibility, you're in a position as a liaison to get that motel voucher, or, hey, we're behind in this month's rent. If we don't pay this, we're going to be evicted. And this is, of course, taking COVID and the eviction moratorium out of it, looking into the future, and just, we can help them with this month's rent if we have these flexible dollars. That's one less family that falls into the system that you have to tap into other resources to serve. So just giving districts that flexibility to assist the need, which continues to grow, and we know this and we talk about it often, but it really is time for more action and providing those dollars to the districts to really, impact the lives of the children, rather than, I think we should do this, let's try this, let's actually put, the dollars behind it and support your districts and your liaisons and, your McKinney-Vento OSP or state coordinators to be able to serve these families. They deserve it.
Thank you very, very much. So, Lakan, if you could switch back to screen sharing mode. We're going to switch to Q&A here, but we're going to, I just want, for the sake of our audience, to just have a quick snapshot of what it is we're actually talking about here. So for the final economic package, or hopefully not the final, but the next, we are specifically advocating for $500 million for education for homeless children and youth. We know, based on our survey of state coordinators and local liaisons, that CARES Act money is broad and is not being directed specifically to meet the needs of our homeless students. And we know that, again, many school districts may have a liaison in name only and need additional staffing and support for the identification of these children. Even flexible funding for housing needs isn't going to help us identify the way that McKinney-Vento specific funding. So that's a big piece. We've been talking about Emergency Family Stabilization Act. So you have the bill numbers here. We're also supportive of specific funding for our Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs for our unaccompanied youth. And of course, we know that our unaccompanied homeless youth also have faced barriers to accessing stimulus dollars because their parents may be claiming them. So that slide has the legislative priorities. There's a link there to take action. I want to turn to some questions now. Here's a question actually specifically about unaccompanied youth who are experiencing homelessness. It says, currently under McKinney-Vento, only unaccompanied homeless youth are covered, but not students who are strictly identified as unaccompanied but not homeless. How do we provide services to those students who wish to be enrolled without their legal guardians but are in a stable living arrangement? So have any of you found sort of solutions for unaccompanied youth? So it sounds like the living situation is stable. They don't meet the definition of homelessness, but they're still kind of having barriers accessing school during COVID. Anybody want to answer that question?
So they're not homeless? Is that what you're saying?
Students who are not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, so they're unaccompanied, but they're not experiencing homelessness. We may have some of that. I don't know. You may have some of that in your districts.
Well, usually when a child is not living with a legal guardian or a parent, we qualify them under as homeless unless it's a convenient situation. So let's say a parent allows their child to go live with another family because that child wants to go to a specific school, then they're unaccompanied because they're not living with a legal guardian or a parent, but they're not homeless. It's out of convenience. So there's a difference whether it's out of convenience or a crisis situation. So if any unaccompanied youth is having access to enrollment in school, they should not have any trouble enrolling in school at this point. Aisha, do you have something to add to that?
And I know, they may be in a stable environment right now, but what happens if that stable environment becomes unstable?
Right.
So I think we have to ask some more questions to really know what's going on, to get a full picture of what's going on with that youth. Because it could be stable, but what happens if it becomes unstable, or because things do happen quickly. So I think a little more investigation may be needed for that case.
And Barbara, that's why the liaison is so important, because they would take that child and they would ask those important questions and dig down further in order to help that child. And I think that's why those liaisons are crucial to our unaccompanied youth as well, is helping them solve problems and getting them enrolled, but also finding out what paths they need to take.
Great. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one, which is specifically about COVID, which is, have school districts adopted new policies as they relate to truancy and absenteeism during COVID? Is it common for students experiencing homelessness to be withdrawn? So a question about absenteeism, truancy during COVID, and whether students experiencing homelessness are withdrawn. Antonio, I'll put you on the spot since you didn't answer.
Sure. So I know in our state, I want to say as of October the 5th, that's when, districts or schools are able to, actually look at the attendance piece, because before it was more, okay, what resources can we provide? If they're lacking the devices or the hotspot to be able to take part in remote learning, then just like in person, you can't count that as an unexcused if you're waiting for transportation to be set up. And so I think, being in the role of the liaison, you're always needing to ask more questions to find out, okay, why is the student not taking part in remote learning? Don't be so quick to withdraw the student. So what I would want to do, is find out kind of what those barriers are to why that student is not taking part in remote learning. I do know, and I don't know if this is a national thing or a state thing, generally for students who have 20 consecutive unexcused absences, districts have the ability to withdraw the student. We haven't come across that yet in my district as it relates to students, whether they're McKinney-Vento or housed. And so I think a lot of the schools are really being creative in terms of how they can connect with the family so that they don't have to withdraw the student. So exhaust all options before you go to withdrawal. That should be the last resort. If you tried everything else and you can't reach the student or the family, and it's been a month or a month and a half and you have no idea where they are, and you haven't received any records request from a different school in a different state or district, then at that point, I would say yes, you could withdraw. But again, it's not something that I advocate for, just because a lot of our students and families are dealing with enough already. So again, exhausting all your options that you have, and then obviously if you're able to make that connection, then you can look at the withdrawal piece. But it shouldn't be kind of the thing as far as you go to first. Oh, they've missed 20 days, let's withdraw them. Let's ask those questions and do everything that you can to keep them, so that way we don't lose those kids.
Great. Thank you. Donna or Aisha, anything to add to the question?
Well, for me, because I'm at a county level, I'm not actually employed by all of the different districts. So I really can't answer for all of our districts how they're handling attendance right now. That's not part of my knowledge base at this time.
I know our truancy department, they're going out to do home visits to check on why they haven't logged on and things like that. And also our social workers are also doing home visits. If they've noticed that students haven't logged into classes, they are trying to do home visits to see what the problem is. And I know some cases they found out that the issue was that they either did not have the technology, did not know school had started. There was a list of things. And once we found out the problems, we solved the issue. That goes back to knowing the need and knowing what who needs it and what the need is.
And back to Donna's point about how important the role of the liaison is, to really be that point person with the expertise to ask the right questions, and then the next questions and the next questions. So another one here, how have you overcome our motel students avoid turning on their cameras? This questioner says, I've learned that most devices provided by schools do not allow background access. So challenges that you have with remote learning and students avoiding turning on their cameras. We've talked a little bit about the stigma that can come with that. So if you could speak to that issue specifically.
I don't know of any district, and I could be wrong, that is mandating students to turn on their camera. I'm also a parent, and so I know that where my child goes to school, it's not mandatory that you turn on your camera, and there's good reasons. Well, there's pros and cons to that. And but as a coordinator for a homeless program, for some of our kids, they really, that's kind of an invasion of their privacy, depending on their situation. They may not want their classmates to know where they live or how they live. They may be nervous. There's lots of reasons why a student wouldn't turn on their camera, but especially a child that is experiencing homelessness might have some deeper insecurities about that as well.
Yeah, as far as I know, because I work at the district level, I'm not, a teacher or anything like that, but there's no requirement that I'm aware of that kids must have their cameras on for reasons Donna just mentioned. So I do know there have been cases where maybe the counselor might reach out to the family or student, after the lesson just to say, hey, we noticed that, your camera is not on when we're doing, the lesson for this subject, and kind of finding out more rather than making it a mandatory requirement that families have cameras on. When we have families in so many different living environments, we have families in shelter. So, okay, you have the camera on and, you're showing your classmates you're in a shelter. So that stigma that was mentioned. So as far as I know, there's no requirement for that. So I think it's really asking, some follow-up, questions and giving students and families that space and that flexibility. I think the key is their participation. If they're logged on and they're submitting their assignments, however, you take those submissions for the assignments, I think that's most important versus whether or not they have the camera on. So maybe it could be a personality, or again, they might be nervous. So maybe building up that confidence for that student to be able to feel comfortable, being on camera. It's not something that just our students are going through. I know we've all been Zoomed out or Microsoft Teamed out and doing all these different, meetings and webinars for the last several months. And there are days when you're just like, you know what? I'm going to take part in this, but I'm not turning the camera on. It's just, a personal thing. So again, I think making sure they're participating is the most important thing. And then maybe doing some follow-up questions and work with the student or family to kind of see what those other issues may be.
Great. So I'm going to do one last question and then turn it over, and then we'll just end with some resources. But this question is, what are some of the strategies that have worked for you in keeping families engaged? We all want what's best for the children and families. Lately, I'm noticing voicemails full. They're not accepting incoming calls. Phones are disconnected. I really worry about these families. So strategies for engagement. Aisha, I'll start with you.
I know have a good email address is really good, because our family, they change numbers, they lose phones, they don't have phones, they change addresses. A good email address is really good. And for the schools, I know we had a child that was missing, a homeless child was missing about a month ago, and every number the school had was a non-working number, but I happen to have a good working number. So that, I said maybe schools need to do that more often, maybe do updates, maybe every quarter do an update, because, when you think about it, if you're moving around, you don't really think about, I need to notify the school that I've changed this, I've changed that. You're just trying to deal with life. So maybe if our schools could do maybe like updates every quarter, you know, if you need to change information, you know, a good number, things like that. But I really do think a email address is the best way, because they can check their email from someone's phone, maybe a library, a computer. So having a good email address and a good rapport with your parents too, you know, because I know right now a lot of them, they don't want to talk to the schools. They're overwhelmed. You know, they've been home with the kids since March. They may not have been working. They may be evicted. We don't know which struggles they've had. They may have had someone who had COVID die. We don't know. You know, so, and they don't want to hear anything we have to say, because, you know, they're like, they're going to just bug me. So make sure when you do encounter your parents that it's a good interaction, you know, and that it's something that's genuine, you know, so they're okay to your emails and maybe to your phone calls. But, and I also like to say, meet your parents where they are. That's the best thing I can give you. Meet them where they are, and accept them for where they are, and try to assist on through with that.
Okay, so Lakana, if you could forward to the next slide, please. Just wanted to share with our audience some additional resources for Schoolhouse Connection. The network of liaisons across the country are crowdsourcing like many other educators, so there may not be necessarily an answer today, but there might be one tomorrow. So one of the things that we've done is we literally take the questions that we get, and whether it's email, phone calls, webinars, and provide an answer on a Google Doc on our website, so you can see the actual questions that we get. Some of the questions in the chat box may have been questions that we've already answered, and of course we will follow up on any question that we didn't get to answer. Also public service announcements, checklists, infographics. For example, we talked about online enrollment and the challenges with online enrollment, so we have a document that looks at how you can remove barriers to online enrollment for our students experiencing homelessness. Other webinars with practitioners and guest perspectives, including a short video interview series with other liaisons, guest blogs. So wanted to mention that resource. And then next slide, we just released yesterday a PSA. One of the big challenges that I see Aisha smiling, so she's already seen it. We're really, really proud of this PSA. We know that children, youth, and families are extremely disconnected right now from school, and that despite the best efforts and the heroic efforts of McKinney-Vento liaisons, our numbers may be lower. So we have to go every possible method. So we have an Elmo PSA, speaking to families with young kids. We've got an animated PSA to speak to community organizations, and yesterday released this PSA, which is specifically directed to youth themselves, so that youth themselves know that they have a right to go to school, that help is available, and it features Des, who's one of our Schoolhouse Connection scholars. So we'll just invite everyone to check that out and share broadly. Last slide is just a little bit more for those of you who are engaged in this issue directly, not as congressional staff. We do have a very active Facebook group where you can meet your peers and continue the networking conversation. For those of you who do work with our congressional staff, our website also has a specific link about the legislation that we talked about and why it's so important. So again, if you have a question that we didn't get to today, I will we'll respond to those. I'll get to our panelists to help respond to questions that I can't answer, specifically about the things that they're doing to try to meet the needs of children, youth, and families who are homeless right now during COVID-19. So big thank you to Congressman Panetta, Congressman Bacon, and to Donna, Antonio, and Aisha. Thank you so much for your time. And really, really grateful for your expertise in sharing it with the nation and with policymakers today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye. Bye.